Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the first legislative coffee of the 2022 legislative session.
A lot of pent-up excitement about the legislative coffee. So.
As I was asked to be the moderator today, I had to think back to the first legislative coffee that I attended. Was in 1997, and it was held at People's National Bank and Trust. A lot of things have changed since then. I was the vice president of the bank and acted as a facility host for that. My job was to unlock the doors, to place about 30 guest chairs around all the desks, and to make the coffee. A lot of things have changed since then. We still have a Tyson as a senator. Things that have changed is that back then I didn't have a cell phone. So if those of you in the audience, if you'll join me in silencing our cell phones so that it does not interrupt the event, it would be appreciated. One thing that has not changed is that this is probably the best forum for you, the voting public, to ask our elected officials questions that pertain to Topeka. I'd like to thank a few sponsors for today's event: the Ottawa Area Chamber of Commerce, the Legislative Action Committee, the Frederick County Farm Bureau Association, and AT&T. And we do have a representative from AT&T, Lane Rattinger, is in attendance in our audience today. So we thank you for your sponsorship. I'd also like to thank my fellow moderator, Richard Jackson, and my name is Blake Jorgensen. And I'd also like to thank the City of Ottawa and the Ottawa Memorial Auditorium for hosting today's event, providing the facility, and for filming, taping. I don't know what you call it now. It's not film and it's not tape, but going out live over Facebook Live, and it will be rebroadcast on the Government Access channel, and it'll be available for viewing on Facebook, on the city's Facebook page. A few ground rules for our event today is there'll be only one question per person at a time. Please hold your applause to allow for additional questions, and you may ask a question, but statements are not allowed. And once again, please turn your cell phones off. Our panel today is Representative from the 5th House District, Mark Samsel. Representative from the 59th House District, Blaine Finch. And our senator from the 12th Senate District was unable to attend this morning due to a funeral, but she hopes to be here at the next legislative coffee. First off, we'll give those in attendance today a chance to give an opening statement about what their views of are happening in Topeka at this time. Mark, would you like to start?
Sure. Good morning. Thank you, Blake. Also want to thank Lane and AT&T for sponsoring us this morning. Appreciate everybody coming out. I know there's a lot of things going on this morning, and including a lot of our local athletes in competition and around the county. I think another big thank you we want to shout out is our healthcare workers and our educators. I know we're still in the middle of a big fight here, and they've been doing a lot of good things for our communities, for our kids, and I know it's a high stress time, and it's still difficult in a lot of ways. Those are some of the things we've actually been working on in Topeka recently. In a very few days, it was really a good thing to see bipartisan Democrats, Republicans coming together in a short amount of time to do good things across the state of Kansas. But other than that, we've got redistricting that's starting to gear up. I know the Senate's done some on that. It hasn't quite geared up quite that much on the House side. But the rest of the things, a lot of our committee work and how our process works in Topeka. For example, I serve on 4 different committees, but that work's just now still starting to gear up. We're in the early stages of it still. After we had our early focuses on what we needed to do right away once we got to back to work in January. So with that, I appreciate the opportunity to be here, and I'll turn it over to Representative Finch and look forward to answering any questions you guys might have this morning.
Thank you, Blake, Richard, and the Chamber and Committee for hosting this legislative coffee. Thanks to Tiffany and the Auditorium for giving us a venue where we can spread out and still have the coffee this morning. Want to extend condolences to Senator Tyson and her family on their loss. Our thoughts and prayers are with the Tyson family at this time, and look forward to having Karen back at the next coffee. Topeka, we're just finishing up week 2. So the beginning of a session, everybody says, golly, you guys don't do anything. Why aren't you getting more done? Why aren't you hitting the ground running? We have a little mix of both, and a lot of what happens now is that committees are meeting. As Representative Samsel said, we try to give our committees plenty of time at the front end of the session because by law we have a 90-day session, and so all of the ideas that have been percolating that need to be introduced, that has to happen in a fairly quick time frame, so hearings can be scheduled and notice can be given, and people can be there to give their opinion on things before they move through the process or stall out in the process. So that's what's happening right now. You don't see as much on the floor time, the meeting in the House chamber, debating bills and passing them and voting on them, with one exception, House Bill 2477, which places into law provisions of executive orders relating to reducing regulations so that we can help our hospitals and nursing homes to get staff. I mean, that was a critical need. It's a critical shortage. The pandemic and the rate of hospitalization for people has really placed our healthcare system under stress. And there's uncertainty for our healthcare workers around vaccine mandates, and for administrators about, I'm going to lose some staff. We had to do some things quickly in order to help ease those restrictions and get more folks available to help in hospitals and nursing homes. So as Representative Samsel said, a huge thank you to our healthcare workers, and we have a lot of them here in our community that work diligently here or commute and work for people in other places, but we're lucky to have them and certainly want to do everything we could to help them. So that was what we saw in the way of floor action on the House so far. All the rest of the action's been in committee on our side, and I see from the list of questions that we've got plenty to talk about. So I will yield the floor, and we'll take some questions and get at what your concerns and issues might be this morning.
Okay, thank you. Once again, the ground rules are only one question per person at a time. Please hold your applause to allow for additional questions. And you may ask a question, but statements are not allowed. And we do have runners that have their microphone. And if you have a question, please raise your hand, and they'll come to you with the microphone. They'll keep a hold of the mic just to avoid contamination or infection. And then we also have a list of prepared questions that we'll ask as well. We'll start out with a prepared question that was submitted ahead of time. Richard, would you please read the question?
I had deals with critical race theory, why that's even a topic in the state of Kansas. It's not taught in any of the schools, certainly none of the schools in this area or even the university. And when it comes to legislation in that regard, isn't that the responsibility of the State Board of Education? Address that to both of you.
Okay. Mark, would you like to start?
Sure, and I think it was a question about critical race theory, and I actually serve on our education committee over there in Topeka. It's not an issue that's come up in our House committee, at least not yet. We've been more focused on financial literacy, civics, some other issues that really, I think, hit home for our kids in Kansas in the future moving forward. I have received a couple concerns, emails, communications from constituents with questions about it. But it's not something that we've spent a whole lot of time on, to be honest with you, in Topeka. There's other things that we've really focused on there, and I think we'll continue to focus on besides CRT. As far as the role of the State Board of Education versus the Legislature, there's a little bit of tension there sometimes. I think we're all better when we work together and are able to work collaboratively with the State Board of Education. But as we saw a little bit last session, that's not always the case when one of our roles as legislators is we knock on a lot of doors. We talk with a lot of our constituents. We do our absolute best to get to know what's on the hearts and minds of the people we represent. There was a lot of those issues, and those are what we try to bring to the State Board of Education. So while they may have some more expertise and some other areas where they've got some experts that they can help us with, I don't know that they're knocking on quite as many doors and getting to know the folks in our districts quite as well as we do. So it's hopefully a collaborative process. The Constitution we've actually looked at, and there's a little bit of talk at in an ideal world, hopefully we're able to work together. I think we get better results when we do it that way, rather than one person one side trying to take their ideas and then have to work over the other side. So it's something that we'll continue to look at as we move forward, work with the State Board of Education. I know we've actually, in an effort to get to know the board members better over the coming weeks and months, we've got brown bag lunches where we're going to sit down with them and get to know them as people, get to know what they're passionate about, why they serve on the board, and continue to work with them over the session. So that's our plan moving forward, and hopefully work on a number of issues with them.
Thank you, Representative Samsel. Representative Finch.
Well, I think Representative Samsel is much closer to this issue on the Education Committee. I don't think we have a CRT bill in the legislature at this point. The question is framed, why is that an issue? It's an issue because if it comes up, every member of the legislature has the ability to introduce legislation. And I think kind of inherent in the way the question is asked is like we shouldn't be dealing with issues brought up by members. That's what makes our process great, is that any person who's a member can introduce a bill on any topic. And our chairs are empowered to decide what they will and won't hear, and then to debate things as they go forward. So it is an issue that is on the minds of some parents. I think generally we're seeing a time throughout our country where there's a tension in the system between parents saying, hey, we should have a say in what's taught to our children, and educators saying, we're the professionals in this area, we've gone to school for this, and we'll decide what's to be taught in the classroom. And I think if both sides are not careful, it will quickly devolve into another issue where we're talking past each other instead of working together to figure out the right path forward. I think, of course, parents should have a say in what's taught to their children and the things that they're exposed to. And these conflicts are nothing new. We have several educators in the audience here, and I can remember when we watched the adaptation of Romeo and Juliet my freshman year in high school, and notes had to be sent home because there was a scene or two in that adaptation of Shakespeare that some parents were not okay with, and they were advised of it, and they were given the opportunity to not have their child exposed to something that they might not agree with, and we worked through it, and it was not a state issue. We didn't have to have a bill on it, but I think if we don't find open communication between those two groups on these issues, we'll continue to have problems, and we'll continue to have members who believe that bringing curriculum issues to the legislature is what they need to do for the people in their district. But as of right now, we don't have a bill, so I can't really comment since we don't have a bill to look at.
Are there any questions from the audience? If not, I'll read the next question. There has been legislation introduced in Kansas that would allow counties to keep all sales or use tax collected within the county and not pass that tax on to the cities within which they are collected. What is the status of this legislation, and what are your thoughts? Commissioner Finch? Representative Finch.
Those were the good old days. We didn't have city commission coffees, by the way. It was different then. So I think we've heard about this topic being brought up, and Representative Sampson and I were just talking about this before. There are over 1,000 bills in the legislature right now. Everything from last year is held over. So those that didn't get stricken from the calendar and died, some are still floating around, some are gone, and then obviously new bills get introduced. We're up to 2,500 and something in the House, which means 500 and some bills, and I think the Senate's at about a little over 500 on their side. You can't be an expert on every bill in the legislature. You simply can't. And so you defer to the tax committee to work on some tax issues, or the education committee to work through education issues. But I will say I've heard of this idea, and right now some portion of the local sales tax, so the state's at about 6.5 cents in sales tax, and then most counties levy 1 to 1.5 cents, and part of that is broken up by population, so that cities within that county get some of that tax revenue, since ostensibly they're helping generate that sales tax revenue. Commerce is taking place in those cities. There is a discussion and a move afoot that, well, maybe all of that money, all of that cent or cent and a half should go into the county coffers, and then the county can decide how they want to split it up. I don't know that it will get serious traction this year. Most Kansans live inside a city, so I think they're sledding uphill a little bit in terms of the possibility. As a person who lives in and has lived in both the city of Ottawa and Franklin County, both at the same time, as former Commissioner Jorgensen would remind us, I don't like the idea of that. I think that the cities are oftentimes the sales tax generators, by and large. Most of the sales that take place in city limits, and that money should be shared between the local units of government to help offset property taxes across the board.
Representative Samsel.
Thank you. Yeah, I would just add, it's why process is so important. Senator Tyson actually is usually one of my tax she serves on a lot of those. She serves on the committee that faces a lot of those issues. But the one thing I found in this is my 4th year here, is we have outstanding local leaders, both at the county level, city level, and even our smaller units of government. And when you consult with them, keep them in the loop, they've usually got some of the best expertise around. And so this would be another example of an issue where you present them the ideas, and we're probably going to have a lot of ideas, potential bills on things that affect taxes this year, because we've got a strong economy right now. The revenue numbers are up, so there's lots of people coming and asking either for money back or other ways to spend the money. There's all kinds of ideas right now. This is one thing that stuck with me ever since 4 years ago when I first started knocking doors. But there was a gentleman in Garnett, Kansas, who was a veteran. He's out on his rickety old front porch right along the old highway there. And his first reaction with me was a little bit of anger once he realized I was knocking on his door, getting to know him, and of course asking him, what we could do to help him, because he thought it was just another round of things he'd heard before. But once I guess he could tell we were listening a little bit more than normal, he ended up in tears pretty quick, which was hard, because he was telling me how it was his property taxes that kept going up, and he didn't have an income that was going up every year, and so he was faced with a very difficult situation. But anytime I think about any of these tax issues or tax bills or things where we're spending even $1 of taxpayer money, Kansans money, those are the times I think about, because it's always the little guy that seems like that keeps footing most of our bills, and I don't know that we're always thinking of them first because they don't have a lobbyist over there in Topeka. But that's one example. There's another couple in Wellsville, Kansas, actually, when I was knocking doors. And it was a very similar situation, only theirs was prescription medicines and our health care and our insurance issues. And they had very similar issues of prescription costs kept going up, but they don't have don't have an income anymore, and so it was the cost of keeping that stuff up. So those are the things that I have that weigh pretty heavy on my heart when we're over in Topeka, is trying to think about those individuals and what we can do to help them, and make sure we can help keep them in their homes, which comes with a whole bunch of other advantages, both moral but also for the good of our state. So those are the issues that I think we will continue to work through for most of this legislative session, and hopefully, one of the very positive takeaways is Kansas is in a very good state right now, financially and with our economy. So that's something we want to keep the momentum moving forward, both here locally and in the state.
Thank you, Mr. Representative. Richard, would you read the next question?
Okay. How do you view the stability of our election laws in Kansas? Do you anticipate, in light of the national discussion regarding election law changes, any changes being made in Kansas?
Representative Samsel, would you like to address that?
Sure. That's election laws is the topic here. I do serve on the Judiciary Committee. That's not something that we've hit on yet, and frankly, as our own Secretary of State, I think would tell you, we have pretty secure elections here, and we had pretty fair, honorable, integral results. So I don't anticipate that's one we're going to spend a whole lot of time on when we look at the other issues that we've got confronting us this session. And so, and it's like I said on the other issues, if one comes down the pipe, anybody can do its entry thing. we'll take the same process, thoughtful, reasonable approach to it, but that's not something I'm aware of at the moment.
Representative Finch?
Yeah, so last year we had a few changes. We sat on this stage and talked about those, and that had to do with barring people from collecting dozens and dozens of absentee ballots and turning those in. We had situations where candidates for office were collecting those ballots and turning them in, and we didn't think that was appropriate. So we limited that to, I think, 10 ballots that could be collected. We also had a provision last year about out-of-state funding for Kansas elections, and limiting that, so we didn't have folks coming in from out of state and pumping in money to certain areas to influence voting that was going on. So we think that should be a publicly funded enterprise, and every person should have the opportunity to vote lawfully. This year, the Secretary of State has a few bills that have to do with elections, and we've met briefly to talk about them. I think they're going to be introduced soon. I don't know if they'll go anywhere, but we don't ever connect a voting machine to the internet in Kansas, but he would like to put that in statute that they cannot be connected to the internet. We have provisions under federal law for when voters are no longer on the voting rolls. For example, people pass away, people move and don't upgrade or update their registration, and you have to wait a really long time, in some cases up to 4 years, before that voter is removed from the voting rolls. And so there are ways that the state can pass laws that say, okay, we still have to give them notice, we still have to give an opportunity to come correct a deficient registration or to let us know they've moved, but we can do that in a faster fashion and keep our voting rolls in a better position. And the other one has to do with audits of elections. But most people don't understand is we audit elections now in Kansas. Every time there's an election, a race, the county clerk or election officer picks a race, and 10% and a portion, I don't think it's as high as 10%, but a portion of I think a precinct is picked, and they audit those results. In other words, that means they go through and hand count. They have a group of Republicans and Democrats who come in, they hand count those ballots, they check that against the electronic tabulation, and if it's not right, it's a fail. And I think that since our current Secretary of State has been in office, we have not had a single election fail in any of our 105 counties. We have an incredibly dedicated group of clerks and election officers across our state, and they're volunteers who help make sure our elections are fair and secure in Kansas. And so when you hear a discussion about, say, Georgia or national voting rights legislation, that is not what's happening in Kansas. We have had targeted responses to targeted problems, and the things that our Secretary of State is proposing at this point are not indicative of a global problem in Kansas. They're just tweaks around the margins to make our system even better. But we do have fair and secure elections in Kansas, and we stand behind those.
Thank you, Representative. Richard, would you read the next question?
While a parent's Bill of Rights for school children sounds ethical and honorable, it tends to place one more burden on the response on teachers taking away from classroom instructions and personal time. What is the solution to allowing local school boards to monitor curriculum and allowing the teacher more student contact time?
We'll start with Representative Finch.
Well, Representative Sampson may have a better answer since he's on the Education Committee. I have not seen a bill for a parent's Bill of Rights, so I don't want to comment on the specifics of the proposal I have not seen. But as I said earlier, I do think parents have a role to play in their children's education. I do think they should be partners in that education. They should be involved and talking with classroom teachers about what's going on. And I think classroom teachers should be sensitive to those desires of parents as well, and they should be having conversations about it. I think that's the first step. You said, what is the solution to allowing local school boards to monitor curriculum? I think they do have a role in that. I think constitutionally they do. The state school board in the state constitution has general authority over the school districts of the state, and then the local boards under the Constitution provide, I think, for the maintenance and operation of a system of schools within their district. So I think they do have a role to play in that, and being mindful of that. We still have community standards. We still have a need, I think, for parents to be involved in having a conversation. And obviously, we're not going to set a specific curriculum for every single student in the district. That would be impossible. But we do have to find a way to make sure that we're not too far outside those community norms while still stretching, preconceived notions. That's what education does, right? It causes us to look at the world in a new way and brings us new knowledge about things. So we need that balance between the two. And the last question here is allowing teachers more student contact time. We only teach kids 186 days out of the year. I think if we're going to be serious about more teacher and student contact time, we need to look at something other than the current model. And that's not to say that we do away with vacations. That's not to say that we do away with summertime. But I know that there's been discussions in USD 290, this district, about what would a 9-week on, 2-week off schedule look like to eliminate the summer slide when kids go home for 3 months and don't have education and don't have instruction. And then they come back and teachers have to spend the first month or so trying to catch kids up. I think we need to be more innovative in how we look at educating children generally. And I think there is a hunger amongst parents to say, I want my kids to be learning more frequently. I want them to have more contact time and instruction. But I don't think cutting it off at 186 days is the way we're going to do that. We really have to question some of those basic assumptions and not just keep doing the same thing over and over again if we want to increase that education contact time.
The same question for Representative Samsel.
Thank you. Well, like Blaine, I haven't seen a Parents' Bill of Rights, and I don't know that one's been introduced in the House or our Education Committee, but my answer would be a lot of the same as well, so not to repeat on any of his, hopefully, but one of the things we can do is hopefully support our teachers. It's something we've looked at in the past, because when we've got strong teachers that feel well supported and they enjoy what they're doing and they feel like they're valued, they do a better job for our students. So finding ways to recruit and retain teachers here in Kansas and across our state, all the way from our 6A schools down to our little tiny 1A schools, and then finding ways to help students get and stay involved with activities. I'm glad that one of the questions that we are not getting asked is about the funding for our schools. That's something we took care of. Our schools are in a strong spot financially. Our state's in a strong spot financially. So those are things that we took care of business when we needed to and have them moving on a forward positive path. More generally, we get better results when there's local buy-in and there's local initiative behind it rather than trying to mandate things from Topeka a lot of the time. So that's part of the ways in working with the school board where we're trying to give resources and options but not necessarily mandating that things be done. Some of those topics that I mentioned earlier, financial literacy, civics, finding ways to get kids engaged and teachers engaged and giving them options and resources to do it. A couple options that we haven't talked about, and if you look at our friends to the north a little bit, one of the programs on mental health that they've been doing a great job with our kids, it's actually student initiated, student-driven, student-led, and then parents and community members help support it, but it's actually not something that financially is that's on the school districts to advance, but that's called, it's #0reasonswhy, and they have done an incredible job working with our kids on issues from anxiety to depression, kids who've been hallucinating in the classroom, all kinds of issues, but bringing awareness, making it okay to talk about those things, finding resources for our kids and their parents and their families to work on those things. But those are things that have not been brought by the legislature or the school board, but because we've able in many ways to just kind of stay out of the way and support, they've been able to use our school facilities and others to help advance those causes. Another one we worked on recently, but it was a similar issue, but a bullying topic. We looked at legislation and ways to help kids. Sometimes they were in minority backgrounds, but all kids finding ways if they weren't being treated in a way, depending on what part of the state they were in or what kind of help they were getting from their schools. But initially we'd looked at legislation and working with local leaders and others kind of decided that a mandate probably wasn't the best way to work through that, but working with the school board, we tried to give more resources and options for those kids and their parents to find what the best fit was working with their school officials. So that's how I think we probably maximize for our kids and our teachers moving forward and continue to try to be supportive without necessarily mandating things to them. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Once again, if there's any questions, we do have one.
I want to thank both of you and Senator Tyson on the support of House Bill 2744, our long-term care facilities and hospitals. Really appreciate that flexibility right now. As we look at flexibility moving forward, I believe in the last 2 years we've proven that telemedicine, teledoc, televisits are very appropriate and should be part of our integrated system and delivering in the future. As both of you here today, would you be willing to look at making it permanent that we can use televisits, telemedicine as just like going into the office itself to help us expand our services, especially to our friends to the west where there's a lack of specialty services? Would you mind talk about your support of telemedicine and its process that we've worked?
Want me to go? Yeah, thank you, Dennis. Absolutely support telemedicine, telehealth. I think it's critical, particularly in rural areas. It's one of the reasons that broadband is so crucial in rural areas and making sure that people can take advantage of that. As you might imagine, the devil's in the details with telehealth, and what's holding it up at this point from being permanent is a question of billing. And whether or not a doctor who provides a telehealth visit or an APRN or any other professional, is that to be billed at the full rate as though the person came into the office and had a full physical evaluation before diagnosis, or is it reimbursed at some lesser rate because you're not using the overhead of the facility and bringing the patient in and maybe not able to do all of the same exams and evaluations that have been done. So like most arguments, at the end of the day, it comes down to dollars and cents, and insurance companies and providers are arguing over what the reimbursement rate should be on those telehealth visits, and that's the holdup. But I don't think anybody, well, I won't say anybody, I think the vast majority of people in the legislature would support expanding telehealth opportunities for Kansans and making it easier for them to see doctors and medical professionals to get help when they need it. So that's kind of generally where it's at.
Yeah, the short answer would be yes. A little bit longer answer is much like in our business community. I think it's become much more normal for us to conduct business that way. And I've noticed even now that we've been back in the legislature for only 2 weeks, no, we're not out of the weeds yet, and we've still got problems we've got to deal with, but it's felt much more normal because we're getting back to more of the activities and the social aspect where it's good to see folks in person, but a lot of our business and even some of the legislative stuff we conduct is still done through the magic of the internet, broadband, all of those other things, and through the computer. So absolutely, I do think that's something we'll look at for the betterment of Kansas.
The next question is, please give your views and status of the sales tax removal for groceries in Kansas, and will prescription drugs be considered for exemption as well?
It's a very good question, and this one hits on a lot of other topics beyond just those two, and that's kind of what I mentioned earlier. When I first got started in this back in 2018, and we did the surveys 2019, but it was property tax that was number one. I want to find a way, and I know we passed legislation last year that's is supposed to help us hold the line on it, but it hasn't done, or at least I'm not aware that it's done a whole bunch to help lower that burden for some of our seniors, veterans, working families, and others yet. But property tax, to me, especially in our rural parts of Kansas, is really where I want to hit our focus if we've got those revenues or other ways to do it. And I don't like even really using the word revenues because I know every single one of those dollars comes out of our pockets and working Kansans. But property tax, number one. Number two, when I asked the constituents in our district, was sales tax. So when that's on food or prescription, or if there's other narrow focuses, we want to keep it on other than just sales tax generally. But then the third one was income taxes. And that was kind of the priority that the voters told me. So those are the priorities I try to take with me when I'm in Topeka. And so if there's any tax legislation reductions coming through this year, those are the priorities I'd like to keep in focus. But certainly those are good ideas, whether it's on food or prescription drugs. Those would help the vast majority of us and those who maybe need a little bit more help than some of the rest of us.
Yeah, so you can always tell when it's an election year. We get things like this. Some type of food sales tax reduction has been passed in prior sessions and vetoed by the governor. Now the governor's proposing eliminating it altogether, the state sales tax on food. This is a much more complicated issue than people would have you believe. The governor in her State of the State said, oh, it's only a 13-word bill, get it to my desk in 2 weeks. When the minority leader introduced the bill, it runs to, I think, 30 pages. It's not a simple issue. Here's some of the complications. The grocery business is one of the thinnest margins in all of business. Grocers don't make a lot of money on each can of peas or each roll of hamburger that's sold. We've talked to people in the industry who say, if you cut the sales tax on food, we will raise prices. We can make more margin. And most of us are used to going to the store and paying, $3.89 for a gallon of milk or 89 cents for a can of peas. And most people don't look at the sales tax on their grocery bill. When they're walking around the store, you're not thinking about whatever that sales tax is on groceries. And I suspect that that's true, that the prices will simply go up. We're in an inflationary period in our economy. We're going to see price increases anyway. It would be very easy for those things to happen, and the benefit of the food sales tax reduction never really gets to the Kansas consumer. The other piece of this is that local governments still have sales tax. So even if we took the 6.5 cents off, most jurisdictions have sales tax somewhere between 8 and 10%. You're still going to see 2 or 3% in food sales tax, unless the governor's proposing that we do away with the locals authority. Some places, like Price Chopper here in Ottawa, are funded through a CID. There's an additional sales tax so that the streets and sewers and water could be extended to that site for a grocery store. If you do away with that, you do away with the funding mechanism to pay the bonds on those improvements, and you default on those agreements. So there's a lot tied up in that. The other question that's going to come up is what constitutes food, and you already see it in the form of this question. Some people say, well, it should only be stuff that is WIC approved for women, infants, and children, the kind of core produce, meat, dairy, bread. And then here comes Frito-Lay, who, by the way, has a plant in Kansas, and says, but what about us? Don't Doritos count? And then here comes Mars, who has a manufacturing plant outside of Topeka, where the State House is located, and says, oh, hey, wait a minute. What about candy? You buy it at the grocery store, you eat it, how's it different than food? We've had these debates before, and trust me, they're going to be coming. It's not as simple as we're just going to exempt sales tax on food. The question of prescriptions has not been brought up yet. Thanks for suggesting it. Now somebody in the prescription drug lobby will come to us and say, hey, we're food too, at least if you swallow the pill. Maybe the gummy vitamins now will be considered food since you have to chew them up. So it is not a simple issue. It is not a 13-word bill. It is very complicated. I personally don't favor eliminating the sales tax on any one category like that completely. In 2015, you'll recall that the sales tax statewide for everything was supposed to go down. And in one of those 115-day sessions, the last day, there was a vote to keep that sales tax up. I voted against that. I would rather see us undo that first. I would rather see us reduce the sales tax on everything that Kansans buy before we look at gimmicky things about one particular sector over another. And I think that would be a better, broader tax relief for Kansans when it comes to sales tax.
Any other questions from those in attendance? Yes? Oh, okay. Richard, would you read the next question, please? Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. Okay, go ahead.
I wondered if holding the mic meant I didn't get a chance to ask a question. Okay, so there are lots of redistricting maps that have been floating around, and just this week we actually got some put out for people to look at, and then the Senate turned right around and passed one out of committee within a day or two after it was introduced. So anyway, one of these maps, or the one that was passed out of the Senate, is this Astra Map, and I'm sure you've looked at it, and it's also in House Committee, and it actually takes Franklin County, puts it into out of Congressional District 2, puts it into the metropolitan area in Johnson County. It takes Congressional District 1, which is way out in western Kansas, and snakes it all the way around and grabs the city of Lawrence. And it splits Wyandotte County into two parts, into two congressional districts. So it's obvious what's going on there. the splitting off like that is going to take groups of interests away from each other that should be together. So I'm just curious, what's your view of this? Do you agree with that kind of gerrymandering, or do you oppose that? Thank you.
Okay. Let's unpack redistricting for a second, because it's a word that's thrown around a lot, and let's talk about what it is. Every 10 years, we conduct a census in this country. We count everybody, and we believe that, I'm going to talk congressional maps for a second, we believe that one person should equal one vote. The way we do that is to redraw those congressional boundaries. Kansas has 4 congresspeople, 3 Republicans and 1 Democrat at this point. People move over the course of 10 years. People become of voting age, and others pass away, and so we have changes and shifts in population that occur in those 10 years, and that's why we do a census. One of the reasons we do a census, and the fallout is that we have to redraw those lines to try to get those districts as nearly equal as possible. We call that deviation, the difference to which one district is different than another. The tightest tolerances, the least acceptable deviation, occurs at the congressional level. We can have districts that aren't quite equal at the state level for our districts or senators' districts or state board of education districts. But when it comes to congressional district, courts have rejected maps that have as little deviation as 11 people out of 750,000 in a district. So you're trying to draw maps as nearly equal as possible. And so we always try to make sure that the number of Kansans is divisible by 4. No, we don't. We don't have a law about that, but we try to get as nearly equal as possible. What has happened in Kansas over the last 10 years is what's happened in every rural agrarian state. People have left the rural areas. They have moved to the urban areas. And so districts that are more rural in character have to get bigger. They have to have more geography to take in more people. Urban districts have to get smaller or be divided so that you get less people. So you can get down to the right size. Okay, that's kind of the theory and practice of redistricting. People want to say that this is something that's just happened in the last week or two. This is a 2-year process. It started when the census started. Our nonpartisan research staff went to school, essentially, redistricting school, to learn the law, to learn the standards, to learn the software, so that maps could be drawn and discussed. Last year we had over 20 public hearings around the state. One of them was right here in Ottawa. Testimony was taken remotely and electronically if people could not physically get there. And that occurred with members of both committees, House and Senate. Guidelines have been established by the Redistricting Advisory Committee that's made up of bipartisan leadership in both chambers. For an example, some of the guides include drawing the most compact districts possible, not drawing incumbents into each other's districts, respecting the fact that current legislators or congressmen and women, their districts should be respected and they should not be drawn in together or drawn out of their districts. And those same guidelines apply at the state level, by the way. So let's talk about what we're at now. Now we're at the place where lines have to be drawn, and this is where people really start to engage, and some get upset. But this is where we're at. Regret it though we must, the line must be drawn somewhere, and so people are starting to draw maps. And the one thing you'll find is that maps are a little bit like mushrooms. You see one and then suddenly you see a whole bunch of them. And the Senate debate on Friday started out with one map, and I think by the time it was over, they had voted on something like 5 or 6 different maps before their debate ended. So that is what tends to happen. Let's talk a little bit about the Astra Map. Before I do that, I want to tell you where we're at in the House. The House has 4 maps in committee. I think there's been a couple more thrown in now. They had hearings last week. And I will say this, if you watched Twitter, you would think that the Star Chamber from the Spanish Inquisition was going on in the House Redistricting Committee. They couldn't do anything right, according to the folks primarily from the left, tweeting about what was going on. You would have thought it was dark and closed and no one was allowed in, and it was a rigged system. Far from it. Our chairman said, this is the date I want maps submitted, then we're gonna figure out which maps we're gonna hear, and then we're gonna go forward. He allowed 4 maps to be put in because that's all there were. He heard all 4 maps because that's all there were. And when the information didn't get posted online fast enough, he said, we're going to continue and have another day of hearings so everybody who wants to be heard can be heard. And folks on the left said, that we don't know what he's doing here, but we think it's nefarious. He's got to be hiding something, by giving another day of hearings. So Monday, the House committee will debate and decide what map they will push out, and then we'll see where we go from here. But a couple of notes on the Astra map, because it's been brought up and I've gotten some emails about it. That map, which is not the official map yet, it has not been adopted, but it does put Franklin County into the Johnson County. It's in Franklin, Miami, Anderson, and Johnson would become a new district. Mathematically, Johnson and Wyandotte counties cannot be kept together. There are too many people. It would violate the law to leave those two counties together. So they have to be divided in some way. Tuesday morning, the House Minority Leader issued an editorial in the Kansas City Star and said, Wyandotte and Johnson County cannot be divided. They cannot be broken up. And Tuesday afternoon, he submitted a map in the House Redistricting Committee that cut Johnson County in half. There is not honesty and fair dealing on all sides of this issue. When people are posting editorials saying one thing and then submitting maps that do another, and it's talking points that come from national groups. And I'll tell you, folks, in a red state, they come from the left because Republicans control the legislature and they want to make it sound as though Republicans are being unfair. In blue states, it's exactly the opposite. National Republican groups accuse the left of being unfair in the way they're drawing maps. The first congressional district must get bigger. It must come east, period. Some of the maps submitted by the League of Women Voters take the first district all the way to Missouri, and they include Franklin County. So if you like that map better, and you don't think that's gerrymandering, we should probably have a conversation. Johnson County has to go somewhere other than Wyandotte, where you're splitting them up. People are trying to keep those counties together. Lawrence has not selected a congressman in over 15 years, unless you believe that the citizens of Lawrence voted for Jake LaTurner, or they voted for Lynn Jenkins, or they voted for Steve Watkins. Lawrence has not been a bastion of blue that's selecting Democratic congressmen and women that's suddenly being thrown into western Kansas to blunt their influence. The second district has been Republican since Nancy Boyda, and Nancy was the outlier because before that it was Jim Ryan. So trying to inject partisanship into all of it and call every map gerrymandering when the problem is that we're dealing with depopulation and population shifts is disingenuous. And the way the question was asked, I don't really appreciate. This is not an attempt to draw somebody out of their district. Sharice Davids would still win her district with the Astra map. Every sitting congressman and woman in the state of Kansas would win their district with the map and the same vote count they got last time. The interesting thing is that the Astra map in particular, the partisan lean of each of the four districts actually decreases. So instead of being plus 24 Republican district, it goes to about a plus 15. Instead of being a plus 13 Democrat district, it goes to being plus 4 or 5. The partisan lean in each of these districts comes down. We're told all the time that's what we should have, fair districts, more competitive districts, less partisan lean. That's what it does. So I'm not an apologist for that map. We may have a much better map that comes out of the House, and if we do, great, I'll support it. But I also think there have been attacks on the process since before the first map was seen. And this map is going to be litigated, whatever it is. It's going to go to court, and judges are going to decide whether or not it's fair and whether or not it meets the test announced in Baker versus Carr and the one, they call them one man, but one person, one vote cases. It will be tested. So I'm sorry to speak a long time on this, but I'm very frustrated that the national talking points are what dominate this instead of what I think has been a very open and transparent process about drawing maps. And really the conversation we ought to be having is how do we stop depopulation in the rural areas of Kansas? How do we bring more people to this state? Because that's the problem. And until we fix that, we're going to be at risk of only drawing 3 congressional districts.
Representative Sansel.
Thanks. I'll hit redistricting. I realized on my last answer, if I may briefly supplement, but I hope as we talk about a number of financial and tax issues this session, one of them that's got some traction and I hope continues to gain traction, it's actually an existing program designed to help our local governments with taxes, but that's the LAVTR, that's the Local Ad Valorem Tax Reduction Program in Kansas. I think that's a good thing for Kansas. That would help with our property tax burden locally. So I did want to mention that. I didn't specifically name that in my last one. And then just some thoughts on the redistricting process. This goes back a number of years when I actually was interning in a different state, and the congressman, he actually represented a very urban area, but also had parts of it that stretched out into a rural part of the state. And I found it very compelling when he started talking about how it gave him a much different, diverse perspective of the state that he lived in. He would spend a lot of time, yes, in the urban city parts, but it also it gave him a good reason to go out and spend time in our rural areas of the state. And so I tend to think that makes a better representative. When you're more well-rounded, it gives you a different, diverse a viewpoint on the way we look at things, the way we interact with one another. And that's really, I haven't seen Greg Mast here yet this morning, but when I first signed up to run for this gig a few years ago, one of the things that I really, actually was the number one thing I told him I wanted to change in my time there, if there's a way I could help find a way to bring it, but was the culture and how we interact with one another. Because at the end of the day, we still have to work together whether we like each other or not. That's the only way our union works. It's the only way it stays strong. It's the only way we lead the world in a world that's got a lot of troubles right now. But when we can bring some folks that are a little more well-rounded to Topeka, thoughtful, process matters, reasonable, those types of things, that gives us better representation, even if we don't like every detail in the bill that happens to pass out. So I guess the notion to me, I mean, some people seem to think that Franklin County or Miami County or Anderson County, I represent parts of all those three counties, somehow being combined with Johnson County might not be a good thing. I actually tend to think the opposite. I mean, that's where growth is coming right now. We already have a lot of residents who, for very good reasons, choose to live in our neck of the woods down here a little further south, but we will commute or drive or now virtually work with companies up in the Johnson County area. But if I'm a representative, man, I, for all kinds of reasons, would prefer and find ways to spend my time down here in Ottawa or Gardnett or Osawatomie, Paola, Lewisburg. The people in these communities are incredible. And in many ways, it's a better place to raise families, make a living, and do things than what we've got there in Johnson County. And I think when we've got the best of all worlds put together and have a representative who can see more of those different parts, I think that's going to bring better representation and make better representatives for all of Kansas and serve us better both nationally and at the state level in the long run. So I look forward to seeing the process develop. I do want you to know that the things, I mean, as Blaine mentioned, some of the things you see on social media, Twitter, some of those things, man, it seems like sometimes we are just always at each other's throats. I may use this opportunity actually to speak on a little bit of a personal note, if I may. I had an incident back in spring where my mental health got the better of me. I had an undiagnosed condition where it caused me to do things where I needed help and didn't realize I needed help. You would think from the outside world looking in, oh my goodness, some of the attacks that occurred, but here locally, in our local papers, our local reporters, my colleagues in Topeka, family, friends, I've grown up in this area, but man, when people could tell that I was acting out of character, the human part of it really came into play. That's the type of Kansas and America where we're at our best. The stuff that we see and the way we act and all those things we do on social media, I don't know that that's really the real version of us and certainly not the better version of us. So I'm optimistic as this process plays forward, especially in the House, not to pick on the Senate, but I guess I can do a little bit more of that since Senator Tyson's here. But sometimes the things that I see go on over there, especially, redistricting might be one of them. But the process that we use, and this is a credit to our leadership, including Blaine in the House, but the process has been much better, and my personal opinion is it's improved every year that we've been there, and that's what's nice. I know lawyers get picked on quite a bit too, but having a lawyer like Blaine and several other lawyers who go through the process to make sure we try to do things right, we can disagree without being disagreeable with one another. Those are the things that I wish you guys and the rest of the outside world could see in Topeka, because it is getting much better, and that's when we do bring forward the best legislation. And that's why a lot of our bills, I mean, we often will get attacked for it when campaign season rolls around. It looks like, well, we voted with the other party a certain percentage of the time. Well, that's because it was a non-controversial bill where we did our work the right way. We worked together, and it was a good product for Kansas. And so about everybody in the chamber did vote for the bill. But that's when we're at our best. So, and I think that's something that will continue with our redistricting process, notwithstanding some of those headlines we'll see in the papers. I mean, that's where, not to pick on the media, but if you've got something inflammatory in our modern social media where someone's going to click on it, retweet it, something like that, that really gets people fired up, and then, you know, the emotion takes over. But that's not really what goes on in Topeka a lot of the time within working with our colleagues, because we've got outstanding people both on the Democrat side and the Republican side.
Thank you, Mr. Representative. The next question that we have is, what is the status of a move to extend or completing statewide broadband availability?
Refresh my memory on this one a little bit, but that's one that we did tackle last session, and very proud that we passed legislation on it. I don't know the exact status of it. That's not one, I think actually, our chairman we probably be getting an update that later here in the next week or two. But we did put a statewide program in place where it is growing and we're investing in it. I would have to get back with him on the details though of where it's at, but I know it's moving in a positive direction, and we were really trying to target and focus in some of the rural parts of our state to help with some of our smaller communities and business that's growing there, as well as agriculture and transportation, because I mean, it's just like, you know, telephones used to be back in the day, or our roads back in the day, but that's really what broadband's become here in the 21st century.
Yeah, so most of the implementation of statewide broadband has gone to the Spark Committee. That's the committee that's dealing with the federal COVID relief funds, and it made up of some legislative leaders. I am not on it, and the governor and some of her team. So again, despite the headlines, there are some things they work together on, and that includes the statewide broadband recommendations. So we're going to, as Mark kind of alluded, I'm serving as the House Utilities Committee Chairman this year. We're going to have an update from them in the coming weeks on where they're at on the plan and getting implementation underway in rural areas. So there's a lot. Again, it's a little more complicated than you'd think at first blush. It touches on rural telephone companies and the Kansas Universal Service Fund, and some other utility technical details, but it is coming. It is going to happen. We are going to see massive investments in broadband around the state, and we have companies. We have one coming in from Bueller on Tuesday, actually, to talk to the Utilities Committee about implementing broadband throughout rural areas in Kansas. So I look forward to the day when all of Kansas is wired, when you can be anywhere in this state and have access to good, reliable, high-speed access to the internet, so that you can transact business, that you can see your doctor, that you can get services and do what you need to do. And I think that's one part of the equation of keeping people in Kansas and attracting people to Kansas, is that ability to do all of those things online, where increasingly people are living their lives.
Okay. Thank you. We're approaching an hour in time here. We have time for about one more question. Is there any in the audience? Richard, would you? If you'd like to come to the aisle.
I don't know about Mark. I'm willing to stay for both questions if we want to get.
Is there another question?
I have a question. What's your issue or House bill that's at the top of your list this legislative session?
Wow, that's an interesting question. There's obviously the one we have to get done is a budget. So that's always at the top of a legislator's list, because you know once the budget passes, you can go home and get back down here to God's country in Franklin County. So that's probably the one that's at the top of the list. There's one that I've been working on for a number of years to help COF here in Ottawa, that would utilize tax credits to encourage private businesses to send work to COF, so that people in the IDD community can have meaningful jobs. The tax credit is tied to providing enough work that it could be a full-time job with benefits, which would help move people from being dependent on Medicaid to having health insurance. The complexity of it, I think, has made it a little difficult to get that one through, but I'm looking forward to that. I've also got another bill that I'm working on that will allow for tax-free savings accounts for people entering the trades to save up for tools and equipment, so that they can they can get started, being electricians, plumbers. We need tradesmen and women, and it's one of the weak points in our system. The other one, I guess, that I'd say I'm prioritizing and want to get done is we have a trailer bill to the Promise Act from last year. You remember the Promise Act allows any Kansas high school graduate to go to community college, technical, or trade school for free if they commit to staying and working in Kansas for 2 years after graduation. And that has to be in a defined high-need area, so they can't just go for any reason. No offense to my general studies friends, but you got to go to be in one of these high-need areas. So I'm excited about that. We have some trailer work to do on that to make sure that, unfortunately, sometimes when you pass a bill, the bureaucracy decides what they think it means. And the nice thing about having a session every year is you get to come back and say, no, we were serious when we said it this way. So now we'll say it this way again and make sure that you have to do it. And so there's some of that that's going on. But those are probably the three that are top of my list. They're not high profile. They're not, the CRT debate. They're not redistricting, but they're, I think, good measures that will actually make a difference in trying to build our workforce and leave a better Kansas than the one we found at the beginning of the session.
Thank you for the question. Love it. Two-part answer. One of them's not so much a bill at the moment, although we did get the moratorium lifted at Osawatomie State Hospital and moving that in a positive direction. But I have a number of colleagues there who are very passionate and working very hard in the mental health, mental illness area. We've got a lot of positive traction moving that in our schools, as I kind of talked about a little bit earlier. In our agriculture community, we've got some positive movement there, but really just opening up that discussion broader across our society. So, when we talk about a broken leg, or we've got cancer or diabetes or some other type of illness, trying to make it okay and acceptable. Because, if you think about those scenarios, we've got everybody rally around, especially in our small communities. Oh my goodness, you won't find more supportive places in the world than when you've got somebody who's going through a hard time and rallying around those types of things. But for some reason, we haven't got there yet when we start talking about other things, whether it's depression or anxiety or bipolar disorder or schizophrenia or some of those other harder issues to talk about and deal with. And I think the national media, we're seeing a little bit of that play out more recently with some of our athletes, some of our celebrities and others, but really hopefully finding ways to make that more commonplace where we can really advance the needle. Even with some of my own struggles recently, I'm not the most likable person in the world, but I'm likable enough that most people, when I talk to them in a one-on-one setting, they will often share that they've got either their own struggles or a family member's struggles or a friend's struggles and some of those things. But hopefully the more light we can shed on those things, the more we can advance the ball and find solutions and find common support groups and other things where we can really rally around one another and find ways to move that one forward. The second one actually is a bill, and so if you can help me lobby my good colleague on the left here and convince him of what a good idea this is. I've got two colleagues and I that are going to be introducing a bill. It's been done on various levels in 28 states so far, but it's an issue that actually hit here home in Ottawa last season when they had to cancel a game because there's a shortage of officials. And I know that's not the most important issue in the world, but we talked earlier about what we can do to support our kids and activities and teachers, but man, not getting to go play a soccer game or a wrestling match or a band concert, those types of things are huge for our kids and their well-being and their mental health. But we've got a shortage of refs right now, and usually the number one reason given for that is how we treat one another. And I know it's a tough time right now with everything else we've got going on and we're dealing with, but it's a bill that's designed, it's a little bit patterned after the other states. It doesn't make it a subset of battery. I know the good representative on my left does not like those types of things, but we've patterned it after other states. And Acacia actually this year has put in a policy that if you approach an official after the game and you're not supposed to for any reason, it's a one-game suspension. So it's a similar something to try to help protect our referees. The number of times where referees are being followed to the locker room, the cars, those types of things. It's a situation where there's abuse of referees occurring, and it's not so much oftentimes at our high school levels, but often it's some of the summer tournament events that come in or our youth events, but it's try to find ways to encourage us to treat one another better, but also protect referees and know at the end of the day that the state of Kansas will have their back when there's not somebody else there at oftentimes those venues to help them. So that's one I'd like to see some traction with, movement on. Like I said, there's 20 other states that have very other forms of it. Right now, we do have assault and battery laws in place. The problem that we found with those, and I've had friends go through this themselves, but if they get approached by, parents are emotional creatures too, and they got upset after a game. This has happened more than once. They go very quickly and sometimes aggressively, violently towards the referee in their locker room after the game. And the problem that then ensues is oftentimes people are able to get them separated, but whether there's a push or physical contact or something else like that, it usually turns into the person who did that, initiated, oftentimes that's already the wrong that's occurred. There shouldn't ever be that approaching to begin with, which is what this is designed to stop. But it turns into, well, law enforcement, once they're finally able to get there later, they don't know who actually assaulted who first or who battered who first. And so it turns in, yeah, we can do something about it, we can press charges, but then the referee's stuck in a situation where they're also going to have to face and defend themselves with an assault or battery charge. And by that point, the $50, the game fee, whatever it is, it not only is it leaves a bad taste in your mouth, but it's not something that they want to endure. And unfortunately right now, those cases and those happenings have been increasing. And I know part of that's probably with the COVID-related stuff. It's a little bit tougher for all of us, but that's also a trend we've been seeing for quite a while. So hopefully our kids can continue to play, compete, and remember, hopefully we're all there trying to help them build values and character that'll serve them well for the rest of their lives. But thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk on that subject. That's one I've been officiating all the way back since I was in high school. So that's one I love talking about, pretty passionate about. And I know we've got one other sponsor. Her husband is a ref in the Johnson County area, and her sons both play, and they're teenagers, and they both ref, and it's stuff that they've encountered. And then I think we have another sponsor out of the Wichita area who he also refs football and basketball. So that's one hopefully we can gain a little bit of traction and awareness on.
Okay. Thank you, Representative. I believe we had one more question here.
I'm Donna Fernandez. I live in rural Richmond. I didn't know what to expect this morning, but I found it very enlightening. So thank you, everybody that was involved. If I go home and have questions tonight, tomorrow, next week, what's the most effective way to reach each of you?
Probably email for me, and it's just my name, blaine.finch@house.ks.gov. You can also go to the Kansas Legislature's website, kslegislature.org, and there's a directory for all of us there that has our phone numbers and email. So if you want to call, you can call. If you want to email, you can email, and we'll try to get you answers to questions that you have.
Yep, same, just my name, Mark, mark.samsel, SAMSEL, and it's also at house.ks.gov. And then if you go to the legislative page, it also has phone number, mailing address, that stuff there. I think the Vikings also have a home game on Tuesday that I was hoping to make it to. So if you're in basketball mode, I think they're hosting Osawatomie Trojans, another District 5 team there. So if you're up for basketball Tuesday evening, that could be the place to be too, as long as the questions aren't too hard for the Tuesday evening basketball.
Well, that concludes the question portion of our legislative coffee today. I'll give each of you a chance to, provide closing comments if you have any. Representative Samsel.
I just want to echo the thank yous earlier, and I continue to thank our healthcare workers and educators. Please continue to check on them, let you know how much we appreciate them, care about them. Same with our neighbors. And then as we continue to move forward, go Chiefs.
Thank you all for coming out. Really do appreciate this opportunity. And to those who are frequent guests, thanks for coming back. To our new folks, thanks for being here for the first time. And yes, go Chiefs, beat the Bills.
Once again, I'd like to thank our sponsors, the Ottawa Area Chamber of Commerce and Legislative Action Committee, the Franklin County Farm Bureau Association, and AT&T, as well as the City of Ottawa for broadcasting today on Facebook Live. It'll be available to view again, and it will be shown on the Government Access channel. Thank you all for coming.